In this video, we're going to look at how we can use our calculator to evaluate trig functions. And just as a reminder here, if we know we can always use the unit circle as long as we're dealing with those special angles from the unit circle. And I want to look at the angle of 30 degrees. So just as a reminder, if we have our 30-degree angle, and again, that would be the same thing as pi over 6 radians. So we can think of this as 30 degrees or pi over 6. And we know from the circle that the coordinates, the x and y coordinates here, would be square root of 3 over 2 and 1/2. Okay? Now, if we had been given a problem and we want to find the cosine of the 30-degree angle, well, the cosine is the x value. So we could certainly go over here and find the cosine of 30 degrees. And we know the x value here is square root of 3 over 2. Okay, now we want to look at how we can use the calculator to come up with that answer. So if we go to the calculator, there is one thing that we really have to be careful with here. With using the calculator, first thing, and this is something you really need to be careful with, is look at the mode. So up here at the top, go into the calculator mode. And if you look down here at the third line, you see radian in degree. So this is something you really need to be very, very careful with. When dealing with your trig functions. You have to know, are you using radian angle or your angle is in degrees? So we're in degrees, so we want to scroll down and highlight degree. And once we highlight that, we hit enter. So therefore your calculator is now, if you notice, in degree mode. And the reason I really stress this is very important because you don't know how many times I've been working with problems and I've had my calculator in the wrong mode, and for some reason I keep getting the wrong answer. Well, that's because we're using the wrong mode. So if we go back to the home screen here, and again, our problem was we're looking at the cosine of 30 degrees. So we would go cosine, and notice it puts parentheses here. So we would type in 30, and because we're only taking the cosine of the 30, we would then close the parentheses. And this is a good habit to get into. Of course, you'll find out if you don't close the parentheses here, you're still going to get the right answer. But if you start adding other stuff to this problem, the parentheses really becomes important. So we type in cosine of 30, we hit enter, and we get this decimal answer. And that is the answer the calculator gives you. And this is where you come up with an approximate answer, 0.866. So here, from the calculator, we get an approximate answer of 0.866. And we can verify that. We know the exact answer was square root of 3 over 2. So if we go back here, what happens if we type in second square root of 3? Okay, now it depends on your calculator here. Again, you may need to make sure that you close parentheses. With this one, I can just move over outside of the square root. And then if I hit divided by 2 and hit enter, notice we get the same decimal. So the square root of 3 over 2 that we were able to come from the unit circle over here, we were able to get the exact answer. Now, of course, we know we're not always going to have an angle such as 30 degrees that's on the unit circle, and that's when we have to rely on the calculator. So just for a reference here, I'm going to go through finding the sine of 30 degrees. We're going to go through each one of these trig functions. So if we find the sine of 30 degrees, and again, we're going to use the calculator. Now, of course, we know that's the y, so we should get 1/2. So if I clear the screen, if we take the sine of 30 degrees and I hit enter, of course we get 0.5. Now the good thing about this is we know that 1/2, that is the exact answer because that's the exact answer we have over here. So this would be equal to 0.5 or 1/2. So then if we want to take the tangent of our 30-degree angle, and I'm not going to go through the exact answer here, but again that would be your y coordinate divided by the x coordinate. And we can go to the tangent on the calculator, type in 30 degrees, and we get an approximation of 0.577. So I guess I should write this as an approximation of 0.577. And then of course, now we want to look at what if we go to find the other three trig functions. So we found cosine, sine, and tangent. What if we want to find for the cosine that's paired up with secant? So what is the secant of our 30-degree angle? So if we go to the calculator, now if you notice the calculator has sine, cosine, tangent, but it does not have the other three. Well, because we're dealing with the secant, that's the reciprocal of the cosine. So in order to put this in the calculator, we're simply going to type in 1 divided by the cosine. Okay, so 1 divided by the cosine of our 30-degree angle. So 1 over cosine, that's the reciprocal, that's going to give us the secant. And we end up with 1.15. All right, and then for the cosecant of a 30-degree angle, excuse me, then that's the reciprocal of our sine function over here. So on the calculator here, in order to get this, we're going to have to type in 1 divided by the sine of 30 degrees. So if we go to the calculator, 1 divided by the sine of our 30-degree angle, and notice we get an answer of 2. Okay, so this is equal to 2. Now that makes sense because over here we said the sine of 30 is 1/2, so that's 1 over 2, and the reciprocal, essentially what we're doing is we're taking 1 divided by 1/2, so 1 divided by 0.5 is 2. Okay, and even if we go back to the previous part of it, cosine and secant, what do we get if we take 1 divided by 0.866? We said the cosine of 30 is 0.866. So 1 divided by 0.866, we get 1.15. And notice there, 1.15 is what we get here for the secant because all we're doing is taking the reciprocal. So therefore, if we want to find the cotangent of our 30-degree angle, that means we're going to have to take 1 divided by the tangent of 30 degrees. So for the calculator, we would simply type in 1 divided by the tangent of your 30-degree angle, and we get the decimal 1.73. Okay, so there's an example of each one of the trig functions. And now notice here we were looking at using degrees. Let me kind of make another point here. Let's look at the sine. Let's say if I was to give you the sine of, let's say, 330 degrees. Okay, now again, if you look at your unit circle, you'll see that 330 degrees is actually located all the way over here in the fourth quadrant. So there's our 330 degrees. And what do we get if we take the sine of this angle? Well, if we take the sine of 330 degrees, we get a negative 0.5. So this is equal to a negative 0.5. Now, what's going to happen if I was to take the sine of a negative 30 degrees? Use a different color here. What if we wanted to find this sine of a negative 30 degrees? Well, the negative means now we're not going around in a counterclockwise. That means we're going to rotate downward here. So this would be a negative 30 degrees. And realize, what about the relationship of your 330-degree angle and the negative 30 degrees? They both end at this same terminal side. So that means if we take the sine of a negative 30 degrees, what are we going to get? Well, let's see. If we take the sine of a negative 30 degrees, and I hope you were able to determine this without entering this in, you're going to get the same negative 0.5 because we're ending up here at the exact same location. Okay? Now, once again, all of these we're looking at using degrees. So let's look at now, what if we have an angle in radians, such as we want to find the tangent of, let's say, a negative pi over 9. Now, it's kind of good to know where this is at. So if you want to, you can just think of your x and y axis here and think, well, where's going to be the negative pi over 9? Well, that means we're going to rotate down negative, and it's only going 1/9, so we're going to be over here in the fourth quadrant. And if we can recall, tangent is really taking your y over x. So we know the value, or the sign rather, is going to be what? Well, here you have positive x, negative y. So that means if you have a negative sign divided by a positive sign, what's going to happen? That tells us then that we're going to end up with a negative value. So we know whatever this is going to be equal to, it's going to be a negative value. So if we go to the calculator, what do we need to do here? Type in the tangent of negative pi over 9. Now, what do I need to do first? Just seeing if you're paying attention here. Remember, we need to go into the mode, and this is where it gets really tricky. We've been working with degrees, but now we have to go in here and change this from degrees into radians. Okay, otherwise you're going to get an answer, but it's going to be the wrong answer. So now we can type in the tangent negative, and also I didn't point this out earlier, but make sure when you use the negative key, you don't use the minus over here, you're using the negative at the bottom. And we want to use the pi key, so it's negative pi divided by 9, and we'll close the parentheses, and we get a negative, which we determined that, of 0.36, and I'll just round it to 2 places, so we get a negative 0.36. Okay, so it's just as easy, but you just need to make sure that your calculator is in the correct mode. All right, so let's look at the cosecant of negative 15 pi over 14. Okay, and again here, what I would kind of suggest is let's kind of look at where is that going to be located. Now it's a negative, okay, and if you want to, you got 15 pi over 14. So if we think of this as negative 15 over 14, and we change this to a mixed number, 14 goes into 15, so that's negative 1 and 1/14. So we know we're going a negative 1 pi, so that would be here a negative 1 pi, okay, so that's halfway around, and then we need to go 1/14 more, so that means we're going to be right here in the second quadrant, okay. Now you don't necessarily have to do this, but I think it's a good idea to have an idea of where this angle is located. So we want to take the cosecant of negative 15 pi over 14. So which trig function do we use for the cosecant? Well, that means we're going to have to use the sine. So that's 1 divided by the sine of a negative 15 pi divided by 14. Close the parentheses. And if we hit enter, we get 4.49. Okay, and one more, and again, hopefully you're trying to pause the video and see if you can do some of these on your own. Let's say we have the secant of 0.29. All right, now the question is, we have the secant of 0.29. Is this number 0.29, is this in degrees or radians? At first you may think it's in degrees because you don't see a pi, but remember, radians is not always in terms of pi. Here, this has already been multiplied by pi, so we have a decimal. And the reason we know this is radians is because we do not have a little degree symbol here. So we're still going to be in radian mode. So we're going to take the secant of 0.29. And for the secant, that means we're going to take 1 divided by the cosine of 0.29. And we get an answer of 1.04. Okay, so there are several examples of how we can use the calculator to evaluate our trig functions, and the main thing is we need to make sure that your calculator is in the correct mode, whether you're in uh, degrees or radians. So once again, be very careful with this because this can make life very frustrating if you're in the wrong mode.